Hi there, students. Familiar. Okay, I'm sure this is a word that you are familiar with. Easy to recognize, an adjective, because you've seen it before, you've met this person before, you've heard this before, a familiar face. This area is familiar to me. To be familiar with something, to know something well. I'm not familiar with the poetry of this lady. Her face is familiar, but I can't quite remember her name. So, familiar, informal and friendly. Yeah, sometimes in a way that doesn't show respect to somebody who isn't a family member. He kissed her in an overly familiar way. The owner of the company doesn't like to be familiar with his staff. Now, we can also use this word familiar, a familiar, to talk about an animal that is the close friend of a witch. So witches used to have familiars. A familiar was an animal that in European folklore in the medieval period was a supernatural interdimensional being or a guardian that would protect and assist witches or cunning smart people as well. I think when they were working with a witch, they were demons. When they were working with a good person, when they were benevolent, they were considered to be fairies. So a familiar spirit. So the black cat of the witch is the witch's familiar. The associate, the attendant spirit, and normally the familiar is in animal form, although it doesn't have to be. Now, with this word familiar as an adjective, you need to be careful because in many languages, familiar, it talks about the family. And yes, technically, a familiar member could talk about a member of the family, but this is very unusual, very old-fashioned and obsolete. And if you say a familiar person, it's going to be confused. It's going to be understood as somebody that you know well. This is familiar, so don't use familiar to talk about families. Just use it to talk about things that are well known, that you have often seen and heard. Something that's easy to recognize. The song was familiar. I heard a familiar voice. The cast of the film contains a number of familiar names. Okay, so familiar, something that you know. Opposite, unfamiliar. To be familiar with something, to know something very well. Are you familiar with this software? Are you familiar with this philosopher? Okay, to be on familiar terms, friendly terms. After a few drinks, her boss started getting too familiar for her liking. To be overly familiar with somebody. And then as a noun, this is an interesting phrase. A familiar, an animal that is the companion of a witch. Normally the witch's familiar is a cat, a black cat. Okay, so the black cat is the familiar, the demon that attends and obeys a witch. Her familiars were two little grey cats that nestled in her skirts. Okay, so a familiar. Their faces will be familiar to you. Readers familiar with this author will know exactly what she means by this. Ensure that you're familiar with the controls of this machine. So familiar, well known, an intimate associate, somebody you're familiar with, a spirit in animal form normally, to serve or attend a person. Um, in this case, a loathsome toad was the witch's familiar. Um, and then, okay, familiar is an adjective which is much more common. A familiar voice, a familiar face, a familiar friend, someone that you know. So they were already familiar faces on television, usual, common, everyday. I'm not very familiar with the botanical names of these plants. Tom is quite familiar with the author. The place felt faintly familiar, as if there was a deja vu um, uh, linked to it. From Latin, familiaris, pertaining to servants, pertaining to the household. Okay, so familiar. Formality. I think as an adjective, 5 in formality, the familiar of a witch. Yeah, 5 again in formality. So, familiar. Bye for now.